Hi, this is Kimberly Stamatelos, and I'm the author of the book, The Compassionate Lawyer, and I have the great honor and pleasure of being here today with Paul Leavenworth. And Paul was a gentleman who coached me in the writing of the book, and but for Paul's diligence and making sure that I stayed on task, the book would never have gotten done. So, Dr. Paul Leavenworth, thank you very much for being here today.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
And Paul is the author of 6 workbooks and 3 books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you have studied your whole life on the topic of leadership.
Yeah, pretty much so. Have been a student and still am. A lot to learn.
Well, as we wrote about in the book, lawyers don't often get trained much in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And could you just give the lawyers that may be watching this a little bit of a primer on what are the basic tenets of leadership?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of confusion between terms leadership, management, and administration. And they tend to overlap, but leaders tend to be visionary and problem solvers. Managers tend to be able to implement ideas. They may not come up with the ideas themselves. And then administrators tend to be the detail folks. So they're interested in policy and procedures and then the follow-through or the maintenance of an organization. So those are just some of the distinctions. We tend in our culture to be pretty management-oriented, and that's certainly important. But the great ideas usually come from entrepreneurial kind of leaders.
And when I hear the words problem solver and innovator, and I think about lawyers, certainly we're solving problems all the time. Maybe not so much innovative, but maybe sometimes we are. Maybe we have to be creative in that.
Yeah.
Is there a certain skill or quality that you find leaders have?
They are not satisfied with the status quo. They're always, or not always, but they tend to be thinking in terms of how to improve things or better ways of doing things or the next best idea. And even in terms of an innovative profession like law, you still can become status quo in terms of your orientation, and because of your paradigm can be limited in terms of your problem solving.
And in fact, I think you have taught about the ideas of blowout and burnout and plateauing, being comfortable in that status quo. Could you discuss a little bit about that phenomenon and how it happens?
Yeah. Burnout tends to happen when we get into the survival mode and we're just trying to make it from day to day. We're not functioning it really out of our passion. Kim and I'll probably talk a little bit more about the importance of purpose in our discussion, but even in terms of law, it can become pretty routine, day after day after day, and certainly it takes a toll on you because you're dealing with people that have lots and lots of problems. So failing to function out of passion, or Daniel Pink calls it flow, can lead to burnout. Blowout has to do with the compromises that people make. So those are moral compromises. They're not just in the area of relationships, but they can also be in the way you handle money, those kinds of things. And those things will tend to catch up with you sooner or later. You may get away with it for a while, but you have to live with yourself. And sooner or later, it seems in life that indiscretion does catch up with you. And then the last is plateauing. And that's where instead of living to improve, grow, and expand, you just kind of close up and just try to make it from day to day. A lot of people go 5 more years till retirement, and they just show up, and they're not really improving themselves, they're not really growing, they're not really challenging themselves, and so that's what we refer to as plateauing.
So certainly lawyers can be victims of the things that you've mentioned, as far as going into the office every day, billing the hours, going through the grind. Some of the indiscretions that you talk about, we see lawyers that have taken money out of their trust account. Even if they decide I'm going to pay it back with interest, that's not acceptable, and those are some things that get lawyers disbarred. And then everybody just going and not taking care of themselves and getting tired, no sleep, and just saying, I don't want to do this anymore. And in fact, we have this phenomenon in the law that we call the recovering lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a joke that people make saying, oh, I'm a lawyer in recovery. And it's not recovery like we think about with dealing with alcoholism or anything like that. It's almost like they've left this sick, addictive environment and they're now going back to be a real human being. And I think that's such a tragedy because it basically implies that the law is a sick profession or an unhealthy profession. What could lawyers that are starting to feel the strains of the practice, what might they do to reinvigorate themselves?
Yeah, and I think that most lawyers, and I'm certainly not an expert on this, but most lawyers go into law because they want to help people. They have a strong sense of justice, and many have a sense of compassion and want to help people that are marginalized and are at a point of transition and maybe vulnerability or whatever. But over time, you get into a routine. You deal with people's problems. Some things work out, other things don't. And but that's not an uncommon reality for a lot of people in other professions as well. And so I encourage people to periodically take what I call mini retreats, and on a yearly basis actually do a major retreat where you examine yourself and see whether or not you are still in touch with the core values and the things that actually helped you to decide to go into the law or other professions in the first place. And it's the whole concept of self-leadership or of self-evaluation. If you're not doing that, just a little off course over time, you end up in a place that you never intended to be. So I encourage people to identify their core values. What is it that they are committed to, and then to evaluate on a fairly regular basis. I do a quarterly mini retreat, and then I do a yearly retreat, just to try to make sure that my life is consistent with my core values and it is directed in a purposeful sort of way.
The idea of a mini retreat or an annual retreat sounds very appealing as soon as we give ourselves permission to get off the hamster wheel and to put the billable hours aside. Would you tell us a little bit about what a retreat looks like? I mean, what kind of things do you do when you go off on these retreats?
Well, the mini retreats are just a half a day or a day, and I've developed my own kind of approach to that, and it involves meditation, it involves evaluation, it involves being still and just allowing myself to kind of calm down. I have written core values, I have a written purpose statement, and so I revisit those things and try to be pretty honest. Now, it isn't just a mini retreat. I also have a group of people that are very close to me, and they hold me accountable in certain areas as well. So a combination of those kinds of things at least has helped me to become more focused and more purposeful over time. And so I can look back and have a pretty good sense that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And because of that, I also can say no to certain things that come up because it isn't consistent with my core values or my purpose. So there are a lot of aspects of this self leadership that can be real helpful. Another thing that I've learned is to build margins into my scheduling. So throughout the day, if I have an hour appointment, and you can't always do this exactly, but if I have an hour appointment, then I don't reschedule for another half hour. So in case that appointment goes over, then I'm not bumping someone else off of their schedule. If I'm done in the hour, then I've got a chance to catch up on emails or phone calls, or maybe I need to take notes and kind of process the meeting, that sort of thing. So I call that building margins into my schedule. And what I've kind of discovered is that it appears as though, you're, not using all of your time. But I've discovered that I can accomplish more if I have margins than if I'm just back-to-back scheduling. I then am not there for my clients. I'm distracted. I get behind schedule. I rush. I miss things. So I think self-evaluation, accountability, and then margins in your scheduling can be helpful.
It's interesting because it seems like many of the experts that I've been talking with in writing this book and doing some of these follow-up interviews talk about that calendar and that time management component. And I think for lawyers, that's one that is very, very difficult for us to embrace because we are measured by how much time we have in productivity. And so shifting our paradigm to say, it's really more productive for me to have those margins and to take care of my schedule and to come at my work from a place of wholeness is a whole new way for us to think, and one that I think could really help our profession. You mentioned accountability, people around you that hold you accountable. Now, we have the Bar Association that we belong to, and they give us, different mandates, and we may have colleagues in our firms that measure us in some regard. But could you be a little more explicit about what a lawyer, or any individual for that matter, might be looking for in an accountability partner or partners?
Well, certainly the basis of any healthy relationships is trust. And so you're looking for someone that is trustworthy, someone who really cares about you, values you, wants you to do your very, very best, also is secure enough to be able to ask the hard questions, and maybe even confront if necessary. And you're only going to probably have a few of those kinds of people. It is a pretty high level of friendship and involvement, and usually it's mutual. So, I have an upward mentor, guy who has invested in me pretty intentionally for about 25 years. And so if I have major decisions to make, I tend to refer to him, and I gotten to the place where I trust him such that I really want his input. He oftentimes will ask me a lot of open-ended questions. Doesn't give a whole lot of advice. I appreciate that ultimately, although sometimes when you're not quite sure what to do, you'd like someone to tell you what to do, but then you don't own it. It's their deal. So, in terms of accountability, someone that you can trust, someone that's a good listener, someone that probably has some expertise in areas maybe that you're weaker in, those sorts of things.
So how would somebody that doesn't have the luxury of having somebody that's invested in them like your upward mentor has, if there are people listening and say, gosh, I really feel a sense of isolation, I really feel that there aren't people out there holding me accountable, I really am maybe worried that I'm drifting from my core values, how would they find someone to meet that need?
Yeah, a couple of things. One of the things that we're in the process of talking about is the compassionate lawyer societies. And I think just generally we do better as people if we are in healthy community. And so one of the things that we're exploring is, okay, if the compassionate lawyer is to become a movement that can empower people and, affect the law profession, at least substantially, in terms of not only compassion, but help people find justice in the midst of their circumstances and healing, that probably a group of like-minded people meeting together on a regular basis, sharing what they're learning as well as their questions, could be a starting place. You can also look to people like myself. I'm a certified life coach. It's one of the things that I do. People tell me that I'm good and helpful at that. So
I'll vouch for that.
Okay. So there are those kinds of relationships as well. So there are options out there.
And I mentioned in the book that I had a spiritual mentor in my Greek Orthodox priest that has held me accountable for over 20 years. And then just meeting Paul through a circle of friends who knew I was wanting to write a book and knew I was wanting to do some purpose work, some work around what was my calling in the law, so to speak, or what could I do in the law that was helpful for a legacy. Introduced me to Paul, and then bringing Paul on board as a coach that I met with once a month at least, and had weekly accountability emails, and I saved all those emails, and they started out like this, and they became more and more like this, and so just knowing that I had to report to you on Fridays was fantastic. Knowing also that sometimes I had missed the mark of the goals that I'd set for myself, but knowing that instead of going, okay, well, you better get back on the goal, you would be very much, let's talk about what got in the way, what went wrong, what was it about this week that, got you derailed, was incredibly helpful. So even to be able to look out into the community, ask others that are in accountable relationships, and finding a coach or a mentor of some sort can be helpful. And I certainly think that that's critical for the law students, because a lot of them are just struggling emotionally and with all the stress. And so as a result of Paul being a mentor to me, I've been able to mentor some of the younger law students, which has been super gratifying. I've really enjoyed that. Let's talk about purpose and passion, some of the things that you mentioned earlier that help us to be vibrant up until the very end of our practices. Mm-hmm. How does one go about finding their purpose?
Yeah. That's a good question. It's probably the $1 million question that a lot of people are asking. A lot of self-help books are being written, those kinds of things. Just basically, in any kind of stage theory, breaks down. It's a little bit like a road map. You don't see the scenery. You know that you're supposed to go from point A to point B. But generally, in our culture anyway, as younger people, we want to belong. As we get older, we begin to discover the areas that we're competent in, and hopefully we'll be successful in our profession. But there comes a time in life, and it may be midlife crisis or later as we approach this concept called retirement, where we begin to move from success to significance. We begin to ask those questions, how am I doing? Did I really invest my time and my energy in the right sorts of things? And purpose is critical in terms of these various transitions, but it's critical in terms of discovering our sense of purpose. So I mentioned earlier that I've had a long-standing mentoring relationship with a man named J. Robert Clinton. Bobby Clinton has taught for years and years and years at Florida Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. He's now retired. He's researching and writing, and he's still very, very active. But one of his theories in terms of leaders who finish well involves 4 what he calls focal points related to a focused life. And the first is purpose, and purpose is it's a drive from within that we're passionate about. And so discovering what it is that we really enjoy doing that benefits others, discovering what it is that gets us up and gets us through the really difficult times in life is pretty critical. So purpose is really that sense of what it is that I live life for. The second focal point is called role, and one finds a role that can then maximize one's purpose. Most people in the workforce probably have roles where they realize their purpose about 20%. And Clinton's theory is that we actually can function in life at about 80% purpose, and then 20% of this, just the stuff that we have to do because we got to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
His third focal point is called methodologies, and methodologies is how we go about implementing life purpose. So, just let me illustrate a little bit. I've been a college teacher in the past. Still am an adjunct, teach at a community college and also teach in a graduate program in organizational leadership. And I'm a teacher mentor. So my classroom is a environment where I can invest in students, but usually in that environment I connect with a few students and I invest very significantly in them in mentoring relationships. And it gives me great pleasure. And at the end of the day, and at the end of the year, and hopefully at the end of my life, I'm going to have that sense of fulfilled purpose because I invested in other people. And so the fourth focal point is called legacy. It's what you leave behind. And for me, because I have a pretty good understanding of my purpose, which is to identify, train, deploy, and support leaders. And because I have found roles to be able to maximize that purpose, and I have a methodology, teaching, mentoring, empowering multiplication, and I, at 65, can look back now, and it's people like Kim and a whole lot of other people that I've had the privilege of investing in, and even though I'm getting older, life's pretty good. And I'm looking forward to more and more opportunities to invest in people and see them realize and reach their potential.
Well, it's interesting because as I hear you talk, there's so many things I want to comment on that resonate with me. One is as a lawyer, and I did trial work for a lot of years, and after a trial, I would come home drained and depleted, and I would physically have to go to bed to rest because it took so much out of me. And I thought I was a solid trial lawyer. I mean, I certainly could, I knew my way around a courtroom, but I never felt authentic in that role. And 30 years ago or more, when I found mediation, then it was nirvana. And I can mediate all day long in grueling cases and whatever stories I hear and whatever intricacies of legal issues I hear, and I can leave feeling like, wow, that was really awesome. That was really great. And so I understand what you're saying about that distinction. And now writing the book and talking like we are now and mentoring these younger lawyers and helping them start well, which is another concept I learned from you, Paul, of having these young lawyers start well and to look with the end game in mind. And I sometimes think if someone had sat down with me and said, when you're getting into the last phase of your legal career, what do you want that to look like? I might have had a whole different path and saved myself a lot of anxiety and wrong turns. And then also the concept of finishing well, which you've also introduced to me. And, it's interesting. I had lunch with a lawyer earlier today who is in retirement and brilliant lawyer, had been an innovator in the early mediation years. And I said, what are you doing with your time these days? And he said, well, I read about 5 books a month. And I got sad because I know that individual has so many gifts and so much wisdom and everything. And And he's not in the practice, he's not mentoring, he's not leaving the wisdom and the depth of experience that he had for anything in the future. So for those of us that are entering that phase of our practice with the idea of finishing well, finishing strong, it gives you a whole new lease on life to be able to do incredible work. I mean, I'm 57 and I feel like my best work is ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly the idea of purpose and passion is one that we can all be looking towards and realize that you can find it. And finally, I guess the last comment that I've heard you say in some way or another is it's possible you can live a full life but have missed your destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now, having through the coaching and the workbooks, some of your workbooks that I've done, and some of the other work that I've done in finding this and what I'm doing now in my life has just changed my life substantially. And I know many of my colleagues are looking for something like that. So, in conclusion, would there be any other pearls of wisdom that you might offer to lawyers? Any instant fixes? We like to, get down to business in our profession.
Yeah. One of the things I mentioned earlier that I'm 65, but one of the things that I began to take a look at is that, in all likelihood, part of this boomer generation that I'm part of, we're going to probably live to be 85 or 90 years old. And, hopefully most of us have made good decisions financially. And so we are going to be able to do what we want to do. And so my wife and I both have been kind of proactive. If I've got another 20, 25 years or so, I want to live as healthy a life as I can. And that doesn't just involve physical fitness, diet, and those kinds of things. It involves relationship, spirituality, and those kinds of things. But, my encouragement is to folks our age is that we can have a vital life, after we retire. I don't believe in retirement. I'm semi-retired. I'm my own boss and I'm my own employee. And I get to do what I want to do, which is purposeful. And I think that for so many, as they move into retirement, they have such a wealth of life experience that they could give to the next generation. Mm-hmm. And so I think some sort of mentoring, especially younger lawyers in the law field, could just be a tremendous opportunity. And I find that I'm revitalized by investing in other people, especially young people. They're energetic, they're idealistic, and they haven't gotten beat up yet. And hopefully by older people investing, listening, caring, or whatever, we may be a resource so that they don't have to make some of the mistakes that we've made along the way.
Well, in conclusion, Paul, I want to take this opportunity to thank you publicly for everything that you've done for me. Knowing you and working with you as my coach and friend and mentor has just made a tremendous difference in my life. And as a result of that, I hope that I will have things to leave to my profession that will be a lasting legacy. In conclusion, if people want to get a hold of you and find out more about you and your work, where might they look?
TheConvergencegroup.org is my website, and you can find out at least some basic information. I do communication events, I do writing, seminars and workshops, I do consulting, and then I also do life coaching.
And in the Compassionate Lawyer Training Institute, which is also something that we're going to be developing, we're going to call on Paul's wisdom and skills to bring us some more information on the topics that we've discussed today. Well, thank you very much. And to those of you that are watching, thank you so much for listening. We hope this information has been helpful to you. And we look forward to more workshops and videos like this to help the legal profession move toward compassion. Thank you.